So it's a little different than the normal literature that we cover here at the channel. By the way, please smash that like. Go ahead and do it right now. Do it now. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it now. Smash the like, please. Share the stream. Make sure you please share the stream. And I'm kind of stuck on my subs, so please help me out. If you're watching this stream and you haven't subscribed, please just click that subscribe button. Click the bell so you get all the notifications. I'm not going to spam you with notifications. I rarely post on the community tab, and we just do our streams. So please hit the all notifications, and please subscribe to the channel. Help me get up to 1,000 subs. Trying to get up there. Also, you can see the links in the chat that my homeboys and all my mods, my beautiful, wonderful mods, are gonna link for you, and you can support me there. You can support me. You can look at the channel description. You can look at the video description, and you can support me. Please think about supporting me. I love y'all. So yeah, my thesis statement for the book is essentially that Don Simpson represents when we think of the ties, as Jay goes into, expertly in his book, so there's no need for me to rehash it. But just on the surface level, in my own analysis, let's say that Don Simpson really represents the nexus point between Hollywood and especially the military with Top Gun, right? And of course, Jay just recently covered Top Gun and the new Top Gun Maverick, but there's not so much about intelligence ties in this, but there is a bit about the mafia, and it's interesting because Charles Fleming, the author, I don't know if he's just naive in a sense, or unaware, or he's towing. Of course, I'm sure he's towing the line. The book was written after Don Simpson's death, of course, because that's where the introduction and the first chapter take place. But he represents a nexus point between these sort of big sort of branches in the pyramid, so to speak, and if you want to talk about culture creation, I mean, Bruckheimer states it perfectly in one part of this book when they are filming Days of Thunder. There's a scene, I mean, it's a biography, but this actually happened, where the military advisor for the Navy, who was put with, was that Top Gun? Yeah, he was with Top Gun, and he was a military advisor. And he was on set, and he noticed that Bruckheimer was sort of away from the set, and he was looking at the beachgoers, let's say, and he was perving over the beachgoers. And the guy walked up to him and he said, "So, are you imagining you trying to get in the heads of all of these people as they're your target audience for this film?" And he said, "No, you got it all backwards. We determine what is in their heads, and that says it. That's all you need to know, really, about Simpson and Bruckheimer. They are cultural creators extraordinaire, and it's amazing how much they truly changed Hollywood. I mean, when you think of the 80s and 90s and cinema, right? Well, let's say the 80s first, because 80s and 90s experienced the transition, and of course, Simpson died in sort of the mid to late 90s, but he changed it. He started working in Hollywood in the 70s, and of course, 70s cinema is its own genre. There's a lot about Robert Evans. We're talking about Hollywood scumbags here, and there's a lot about Robert Evans in this book and what a scumbag he was, and it's not just him, of course. I mean, Simpson is Mr. Hollywood. Like, he is. When you think of Hollywood producers and all of their gross things and all of their degeneracy and excesses and their wild parties and all that stuff and their money, Simpson is it. This is the guy. There is no producer who has ever been there. I would say there's never been a producer like Don Simpson, but we're going to see that there are characters who have been like him, especially, Fatty Arbuckle and some of the early Hollywood characters. This book's falling apart. Look at this book. Totally falling apart. It's old paperback. Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon. If you haven't read this book, if you can get a copy of this book, you should read it. And get a copy of this book. This book is great. So, I mean, I really tore through it. It's so interesting. It's so wild. So, what he says in the introduction essentially is he's going over Don Simpson and the character of Don Simpson. He's not really psychoanalyzing him, but he's talking about what he represented because he was a carnival of contradictions. He was excessive and brash and arrogant, but of course he was Hollywood and deeply insecure. And he was also, you may not know this, but he was also a North Pacific Northwest Baptist, and he was. There are certain parts of the book where it describes Simpson and Paul Schrader. If you don't know Paul Schrader is another sort of classic wild man of especially '80s Hollywood. Esterhaz and Paul Schrader are two of the big sort of superstar screenwriters of the era, especially Esterhaz. I mean, Joe Esterhaz, whom we'll get into in a little bit, is a unique character. But Paul Schrader and Don Simpson both came from sort of Protestant evangelical backgrounds, and they would be the last ones up, of course, at 4 o'clock the next day after the party. And Paul Schrader said that Don Simpson, was the only one that he could talk to that he related to, because they would talk about religion. And I think that Don Simpson was searching for meaning. He really was a real scumbag in every way. So I'm not trying to redeem his character. I'm simply talking about, and not as if it were up to me to redeem his character. I'm just saying, and I'm not trying to judge him. I'm just saying we're looking at this, we're analyzing this and talking about the worldview that's presented in his movies, especially the propagandistic elements, which he was highly conscious of. The way that he went about movie making and storytelling, as they always say in Hollywood. And remember, like I said in the last stream, Jackie Treehorn's feelings story, right? Feelings, and he truly changed Hollywood because he realized that it was America's. I mean, it's America's biggest export, right? Entertainment, film, Hollywood, the image, especially the image of America. He was conscious of this, and he was conscious of creating something and molding it in his way. He was also conscious of his own image and of molding himself into a legendary, excessive Hollywood character. When he turned 50, he was in one of his stints in rehab, and one of his friends came to him and said, "All right, you're 50, now it's time to become a monk. You're going to go on your search for faith." And he said, "Come back to me in another 25 years. I still got another 25 years. He had like a week to live. And what a shame, right? But a lot of this stuff came out, of course, if you were alive at the time, a lot of this stuff came. I mean, I remember when he died. It was, all over the place. And it was, of course, right before Con Air. I think Con Air was the first solo Bruckheimer production. It wasn't a Simpson Bruckheimer production. Then it just became Michael Bay and Bruckheimer. And he was sort of absent during the making of The Rock and some of the later movies. In fact, he was not as hands-on as he sort of presented himself during the making of Top Gun. He was the classic big ideas man. He was the ideas man. And you have this weird conscientious duality between Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. They really were like, there's a flip side to that coin. They were two sides of this singular Hollywood coin. They cultivated that image, and they presented it in everything from how they spoke to the press, how they spoke to others in the industry, and how they appeared in magazine shoots, like for when they were in Esquire and Vanity Fair. Don Simpson was highly conscious of his image, of course. I mean, this is the era of image is everything, right? Which is sort of a byproduct of Don Simpson. When people talk now about all of the crazy things, like, of course, with Teeter Peel, when people talk about Teeter Peel and his BLOOD treatments and his sort of in-house surgery, and the fact that, Hollywood is become insular in the sense that, when you get plastic surgery, you get it at home now. That comes from Don Simpson. He, this has been around for years, but he was one of the major proponents of this. You know, he had dramatic weight losses. His drug addiction was insane, totally totally off the charts, and such that uh, when he decided to get try to get clean, if he was sincere about that, but one of his, and who knows, but one of the times when he did that, he hired a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist ended up living with Don Simpson. Of course, he had a palatial residence and everything, and the guy was living in the pool house, and then the scandal broke that the psychiatrist died of a speedball addiction. Of a speedball OD in the pool house. He was found nude in the bathroom of the pool house. I forget what he was reading. Don Simpson was reading an Oliver Stone biography, a new Oliver Stone biography when he died. And I was trying to remember which Oliver Stone. I have an Oliver Stone's sort of fantastical novel that was published in 1997 about Vietnam. But it wasn't that one. This was a biography of Stone. And remember that this was the time if you remember, or if you know now from reading about Oliver Stone, this was like the time when there was a book published about Oliver Stone and his own excesses in the 90s. He had just filmed U-Turn, that movie U-Turn. Most people don't remember that movie, but it's with Sean Penn, Jennifer Lopez, etc. And one of his production assistants published a book talking about how, he was, she said that on the set of Natural Born Killers, like he was, on mushrooms, and he like was flapping his wings in the desert, and they came upon a checkpoint, and he tried to fly away. He thought he was a bird. I'm sure Don Simpson, identified with that. He wasn't into psychedelics. He was into hardcore narcotics. He had an enormous number of drugs in his system when he died. Everything. And then, of course, when Simpson died, at the same residence where the guy died in his pool house, the investigation took that into the whole, Dr. Feelgood, Dr. Nick, Elvis, Conrad Murray, Michael Jackson territory of looking for where this was going. There's also stuff in here about fixers, crooked cops, Heidi Fleiss, sex, TRAF, all that stuff. Remember, this is also the time when all that broke, and there's stuff about every celebrity in this. Jack Nicholson. There's revelatory information which we'll cover over the course of the analysis about people like O.J. Simpson, Jack Nicholson, Robert Downey Jr., Charlie Sheen, and some of it I'm sure you've never heard before. So O.J. Simpson and then Don Simpson. There's stuff in here about O.J. Simpson. But, of course, we're going to be covering, it's funny, Jeff says, every time that I say Simpson, he thinks of O.J. But, of course, today I Googled something about Don Simpson, and Homer Simpson popped up. So, whatever. Anyway, but Don Simpson certainly knew O.J., and he partied with him, and they had the same dealer. And we get a bunch of stuff about Dealers to the Stars, the Rainbow Room in the 80s. One of the books that kind of ties into this, in my mind, is Scar Tissue by Anthony Kiedis, because one of the famous guys infamous Dealers to the Stars in this, who's a dealer to the Rainbow Room, has I'm pretty sure he used a pseudonym in the book because this was prior to Anthony Kiedis' autobiography, where he talks about how his dad was that guy. Now, there may have been multiple guys because this guy has a unique way of slanging to all the bands, to Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses. They're all discussed in the book. But Simpson was like, he was conscious of his rock and roll image. That's what he wanted to cultivate. And just before he gets started into the introduction here, did you know, I'm sure you may know this, but so if you know this, forgive me, but the reason that movies have soundtracks is really down to Don Simpson. And he is the guy who realized the potential of MTV in the early 80s. Remember the launch of MTV in the early 80s. And he realized that if you can get popular music, if you get pop music and put that on the soundtrack of your film, make it play during the film, like Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone, or like Giorgio Moroder's, and he wrote the song, the Berlin song, "Take My Breath Away" for Top Gun, etc. Or oh, What a Feeling for Flashdance, which he, by the way, was one of his, and he admitted this was one of his mistakes. He actually thought that it would be he thought it would be that and the Bonnie Tyler song. He didn't think it would be a hit, and he was willing to like sort of he bet a bunch of money on it, and but it actually made it. All of the songs, I mean, were in the top 40 for I don't know an extended period of time. Uh, the, Certainly the summer. Don Simpson also is the guy responsible for creating the blockbuster movie. Well, Jaws. Well, that's not true actually. In 1975, Jaws was the first summer blockbuster, but Simpson was around at the time. I think he was a studio head for not Paramount, but he was a studio head somewhere. And he realized the potential of Jaws, and then he is the guy who really he took the new thing, the summer blockbuster, and really made it explode, like wall to wall release, all at the same time nationwide. His movies made billions of dollars. Did you know that, for instance, Beverly Hills Cop is the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time, especially adjusted for inflation? I think it was only matched when Matrix Revolutions was released in the 2000s, but it was an enormous hit. The budget was like $10 million. Now we'll talk a little bit about budgets and how that's a sort of a money laundering scheme in the first place, but the book really gets into this on a surface level in the sense that Don Simpson was not interested in he was not interested in art. He was not interested in like anything other than his and Bruckheimer's singular message and mission. And they had a vision. They knew exactly the creative people to get. He was relentless on his assistants. He is the Hollywood scumbag in terms of the casting couch and abuse of the people that worked for him. He is not a good. He's not a good or a virtuous guy. We know that, but also what Fleming says here in the biography, in a sense, is that his book kind of gives a message, and I tend to throw all that away when we're reading literature, in terms of like a moral of the story, because that's not what literature is. But this is a biography, and he says it's also kind of presumptuous to assume from one guy that this other guy's life is a cautionary tale. He says but what he says is like if it's a cautionary tale, the cautionary tale is that Don Simpson was perfect for Hollywood because it was the place where a guy of his sort of magnitude and arrogance and excess could live with impunity, right? It's one of the only places. Even the ties between the film industry and big business, big banks and corporations are essentially have a system of insular or interior checks and balances that Hollywood does not have because they want this. They cultivate this sort of excess. He was fired. He was fired because he was so at one point he was so out of control. This is before Top Gun. He was so out of control with his addiction that he would crash it. He would buy a new Porsche or a new Ferrari. He would crash it in the parking lot of the studio. He would be late to an executive meeting. And this wasn't a meeting like with, I don't know, a bunch of directors and writers and actors whom Simpson really had a contempt for. These were the elites of Hollywood. These are like the studio heads. These are Katzenberg, Geffen, Barry Diller, these kind of people. Head of ICM, the heads of the studios. And Simpson had a meeting with them. He was late to the meeting. He walked in. His weight had ballooned. He was like, and they were like, "Why are you 30 minutes late?" And he was like stuffing his face with cheeseburgers. And he was like, "Man, I was just so fucking hungry." And then he was fired after he passed out in a bowl of soup at a board meeting. And they were like, "Get this guy the fuck out of here." But of course, then he went on to found his own company with Bruckheimer. And then eventually he split with Bruckheimer because Bruckheimer was tired, really because Bruckheimer was tired of having to cover for all of the excess of Simpson, and he went on to found his own studio. But what he says here on page 5 is the introduction takes place at the memorial service for Don Simpson, which was like an actual, Hollywood A-list affair, because all the studio heads showed up, all of the movers and shakers of Hollywood, all of the movers and shakers of Hollywood showed up, along with, of course, Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson and Will Smith and all these people. Think of the actors that whose careers were made because of this guy, right? He made their careers. He straight up made the career of Tom Cruise, who was faltering at the time when he made Top Gun because he had just come off of Ridley Scott's Legend, which was kind of a flop, and he did, he had done Risky Business, but he'd done like Taps and a couple other movies, and he just wasn't making it. And then Top Gun is what launched him. Launch, nice pun, because the launch of the F-16 or whatever. Okay, anyway, sorry. He also made, Eddie Murphy was already a star with SNL, but of course this made him a movie star with Beverly Hills Cop. He made the career of who? There we go. All right, we good? Okay. Okay. All right, we should be good. We should be good. You guys, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what that was doing. But that was OBS. It disconnected and then reconnected. So it's bound to happen. Stuff's bound to happen. Happens all the time. Happens all the time to us out here in internet world, as any of the homeboys can tell you. So yeah, refresh it and you should be good, y'all. If I start to lag or if there's any more problems, just let me know, and we'll disconnect and reconnect. But I was having problems all day with this shit. My damn I don't know what's going on, but my damn DoorDash wouldn't even connect. So because whatever. Anyway, all right, all right. So where were we? Let's go from. I'm gonna go from. Again, the Memorial Day, the memorial service for Don Simpson that occurred at Morton's Steakhouse. This occurred at Morton's Steak. Hey, listen, we're gonna do our memorial service for Don Simpson, right? We're gonna try to make it a cautionary tale, and we're gonna judge him because he was excessive, even though we're all scumbags. Says fucking Jeffrey Katzenberg or whatever, and David Geffen, who. Whatever. Okay, so what it says is on page 5, it says, let's see, pages 4 and 5. As the national magazines took their turns eulogizing those, Simpson's contradictions became glaring. This is what I meant by the sort of duality between he himself and Jerry Bruckheimer, and then of course within himself. He was beloved and he was loathed with equal ferocity. Y'all like my jackalope hat? That's a jackalope, by the way. That's another skateboarding hat, okay? It's not a John Deere hat. It's a skateboarding hat. That's my jackalope. A man of intense intelligence and an encyclopedic understanding of film history and the inner workings of the film industry. Film history and film industry. He was also the co-creator of some of Hollywood's most formulaic, simple-minded movies. He was outrageously generous to friends and family, sending his parents on holiday cruises with their friends, paying medical expenses for one madam who supplied him with prostitutes, and helping another post bail, putting his younger brother through law school and paying private school tuition for his niece and nephew. But he was horribly abusive to secretaries and assistants. He was intensely arrogant, but he was consumed by self-doubt and self-loathing. He was a control freak obsessed with fitness, youth, and health. He was also a binge eater with a history of dangerous weight gain and loss, and out-of-control, seriously addicted drug user. He was a carnival of contradictions, a garish, screaming midway of natural and unnatural impulses, each display a sideshow of excess. Everything he did was done with intensity, total commitment, and an admirable absence of hypocrisy, whether it was browbeating a script through 15 writers and 37 drafts until it was a fable made for morons, for beating a hooker until she begged for mercy, which he did. And in Hollywood, he thrived. He was, in short, very much a Hollywood fixture. His excesses, his strengths and weaknesses, his dreams and demons, his enthusiasms and addictions, personal and professional, were entirely of Hollywood, uniquely suited to not just the film industry, but specifically the film industry of the 70s and 80s. He was so perfect a representation of what was right with Hollywood and what was wrong that he might have been its mascot. From the outside, Hollywood is a mass market fantasy factory responsible for billions of dollars in annual revenue and for America's single largest export product. It is the creator of our collective imagination and perhaps the lasting record of what we are and believe and dream. From the outside, it is El Dorado to thousands of young people who every year leave small towns across the country and travel to Los Angeles dreaming of becoming the next Tom Cruise or Demi Moore. Demi Moore, it says that her nickname in Hollywood was Gimme Moore. She was also excessive. And it says, but of course the book was written, this is the first edition, and a lot of the book, I think, surely has been revised, especially his sort of naive talk about drugs and the sex, TRAFFICK industry. I'm sure that part hasn't been revised, but surely some of his mention of drugs has been revised. For instance, he'll mention like 3 different drugs that are the same drug. Like it's just they're using the generic name, and it's like he doesn't know that. He says, let's see. As a result, the entertainment industry does not require anything of its inside people other than an ability to produce hit movies. It doesn't ask its employees to be intelligent, educated, decent, honorable, fair, good-looking, or ethical or ethnical. It only asks that they produce income-generating product. And as it does not require intelligence, education, decency, honor, or fairness, neither does it reward those qualities. Hollywood is the place where one can overhear dialogue such as this one morning at the Four Seasons Hotel. Man number 1, you're lying to me. Man number 2, yes, I know, but hear me out. TGF asked about my pennant. It's a Trinity knot. I don't know if you can see it. It's a Belfast Trinity knot. So he says, let's see. This is great. It says, in this world, Simpson thrived as he could not have in any other. He was irrational and unpredictable and irresponsible in the extreme, but brilliant, often enough that for a long time, none of his peculiarities proved a liability. Among his peers in the movie industry, Simpson was admired for his directness. Bruckheimer is the only one to really watch out for, one veteran industry observer said once. He'll stab you in the back. Simpson, at least, will stab you in the chest. That, in Hollywood, is what passes for a compliment. Pretty interesting. Let's see. He spent just about his drugs, his pharmaceutical records. Of course, he was doctor shopping. His pharmaceutical records, prescription medication expenses at more than $60,000 at the time of his death. One 10-day period in August 1995 shows Simpson's pharmacy expenses at $38,600. Police and coroner's documents also show that Simpson was experimenting with prescription doses of morphine, Seconal, and GHB. These medications were being ingested. Autopsy reports would show, in addition to large quantities of alcohol and cocaine. Excessive doses also have deadly potential. Overuse of Atarax, Benadryl, Compazine, Venlafaxine, Haldol, lithium, Narcan, Phenergan, and Tijan. Any one of these medications can cause seizures and convulsions. Overdosages of Narcan could cause tachycardia and cardiac arrest. See, I don't think that Charles Fleming knows that Narcan is not a drug he was taking to get high. It was probably in his system because he'd overdosed and somebody Narcaned him. But he doesn't seem to know that. He says, more ominously, Simpson was using heroin. Sometime in 1993, one of Simpson's prostitute friends had introduced him to a heroin dealer who worked under the name Mr. Brownstone. Heralded in Hollywood song, he is the subject of the Guns N' Roses tune "Mr. Brownstone," a nickname for heroin. A frightening character whose eyes burn bright with paranoia. This guy has long dealt drugs to the record and movie crowd, and even suspects it was his dope the young actor River Phoenix ingested on the night he collapsed and died in front of the Sunset Strip's Viper Room. Remember, Viper Room also was owned by Johnny Depp. And what you may not know, I don't know if you guys know this, but I learned this from the Anthony Kiedis book Scar Tissue, is that River Phoenix was hanging out with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, especially during the making of the recording of Blood Sugar Sex Magic. If there's ever a more uh, Crowleyan name for an album, right? And now that's not to say, I mean, look, Blood Sugar Sex Magic is one of my favorite albums of all time. You know, came out in 1991, and like I was obsessed with Red Hot Chili Peppers. But at the same time, the album name is absolutely Crowleyan, right? And if you guys ever heard Nick Rochefort's impersonation of Anthony Kiedis, it's pretty funny. Um, it's pretty funny how he does it. That was terrible. Sorry about my impression. Uh, but but what you may not know is that when River Phoenix died on scene outside of the Viper Room, do you know who he was with? He was with Flea, and he was with Joaquin Phoenix, who was much younger than River Phoenix, and with their sister Summer Phoenix. And it was actually Joaquin Phoenix who called the cops to report the OD and to ask for the EMTs. Um, Anthony Kiedis, ironically, it was one of his clean periods, so he was not there. But that's pretty interesting. Um, he was also on morphine, Demerol, heroin, cocaine, Toradol, Valium, Librium, Depakote, because he was on bipolar medication, Thorazine, Vistaril, Lorazepam, Valium, Vicodin, um, uh, let's see, promethazine, benztropine, Unisom, Compazine, Xanax. He experimented with testosterone injections, and actually, at one time, one of the funny stories is that, and I got the idea. By the way, I got the idea for this. Got to give him credit, as if he would ever see this, but I got to give him credit. Um, Nick Mullen, the comedian Nick Mullen, I was watching his one of his interviews, Nick and Adam, recently, and he was talking about High Concept, and of course the Don Simpson Jerry Bruckheimer interview that I posted in the community tab. But he clued me into this story. It's one of the funniest stories. The way Nick tells it is amazing. Basically, on the set of Days of Thunder, he was getting injections of testosterone into his buttocks, and at one point he like sat down on the set, and the injection like broke or something, and suddenly he like went into a roid rage because he was also on GHB and steroids, and he went up to one of the stock cars on the set and ripped the door off of the car. He also was an aspiring actor. He hated actors, but he was so conscious of his image that he wanted to be an actor, and he like put himself in the movie Days of Thunder as the character Leon Benedetti. He's actually in the movie for like a blip for a second. They cut his part way down, of course. And the person responsible for cutting it down was, of course, Tom Coombe. And Tom Coombe, like, was like, okay, I'll tell him. And he was like, look, man, we're so over budget. And that's one of the reasons why. Yeah, no Streamlabs yet. We'll get Streamlabs and super chats when we get up to 1,000 subs, and hopefully that'll make it easier, you guys. Shouts out to everybody who's here. Thank you for being here. Love you, love my mods. Thank you. But the reason that Days of Thunder it wasn't a flop. It did okay, and I remember at the time. I think I've told this before, but like my friend's dad owned King's Dominion, which is a theme park in Virginia, and he sold it to Paramount, and Paramount then made it Paramount's King's Dominion, PKD as they tried to call it in the 90s. Extreme 90s PKD. That's when they put in the roller coaster, the Hurler. They put in the Hurler because of the popularity of Wayne's World, and they would show Wayne's World clips. Zang! They would show Wayne's World clips like as you went up the Hurler, and of course they had the Rebel Yell, the Grizzly, and all these great like old rides. But they also put in the first like virtual reality ride. And of course, it was 1990, and I was 10. Well, I was 9 in summer of 1990. But um, they put in the ride Days of Thunder. And basically, I mean, this thing was so shitty. Like, you go in and it's one of those deals. It's like the ride at the top of the Empire State Building. Have you guys ever, did you know that? I don't know if you know that, but there's a ride at the top of the Empire State Building. You go up to the top and, like, you sit, it's the same in Days of Thunder. You sit in, like, theater chairs, and they like strap you in, and then they play like Days of Thunder on the screen, and the chairs like move. And it's like Tom Coom right on the fucking edge, man. He's right on the line, man. He's right on the fucking edge. Um, and the Empire State Building ride does that too. Like, you're at the top of the Empire State Building, and it's like, this is the Empire State Building, and then like, this is weird, this is creepy, because I went to this and actually rode the ride in, like, this was summer of 2004, so this was well after the Big Nine event. But like, you're on the ride and you're at the top, and you like go over the edge and down to the ground, which is bizarre, right? That they probably still have that. New York strong, you guys. Anyway, so they put in the Days of Thunder ride, and one of the reasons why Days of Thunder was not a resounding success like Top Gun was because this was sort of it was getting to be the tail end of the high concept era. I mean, Simpson and Bruckheimer still had huge hits after this, of course, with The Rock and Bad Boys and stuff. But the high concept era essentially is about we haven't. I mean, okay, so let me go back. Here's how Top Gun was basically made. Okay, this is how the idea for Top Gun came about. Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer were sitting at their desk. They had they dressed alike. They like they bought matching cars. They lived together for a while after Bruckheimer. I think that Bruckheimer was divorced or he was fired or something, but he lived with Simpson for a while. And they had a C-shaped desk at their studio, and this allowed them to like look at each other and like have their little meetings, because again, they're like two sides of this weird dualistic coin. Jerry Bruckheimer is like the guy who like gets it done and does he does like the matter of fact things in the business of making movies. Don Simpson is the ideas guy. And what happened was Bruckheimer was like reading a magazine. He was reading like Soldier of Fortune or something. And then he saw like he was reading a magazine, and he saw like a picture of a Navy jet, like with an aircraft carrier. And he was like, Don, look at this. And Don Simpson was like, fuck yeah, we're going to do it. Here's what we're going to do. Okay. And he like basically called up a screenwriter, and he was like, okay, here's the idea. We've got an aircraft carrier, we got jets, and we got a bunch of guys, and they're trying to be the best, man. They're trying to be the best. And we've got a star, and we don't know who it's going to be yet. Do it, write it. And then the guy goes off and like writes the script, and then he wrote it like 37 times. Actually, I think Top Gun they bought the idea from somebody, which is not unusual in Hollywood. But he definitely made it his own. He did the same thing with Joe Esterhazy. Joe Esterhazy wrote Flashdance, and Flashdance was a huge hit, right? And a huge soundtrack. This is like early 80s. What's Flashdance? 83 maybe. Beverly Hills Cop was like 84. And what he said was like, the high concept is this. It's like, okay, we've got a beautiful girl, and she's a dancer, man. She's like a stripper, okay? But she's like stripping for the coal miners, okay? She's stripping. She's a welder, okay? She's a welder, and like, but she's got, she's like a bad girl gone good, because then she gets her. She's got to be something smart. She's got to be like she's trying to be an astrophysicist or something, right? And that's what Kelly McGillis was in Top Gun. Remember, Kelly McGillis the character evolved over time, over the various screenplays, but Kelly McGillis became the like astrophysicist, right? That's how she developed her relationship with Tom Coom. And then in Flashdance, it was like, okay, she's going to go off and be like a New York ballerina dancer. And a couple of interesting things about their movies, also dealing with the high concept, is that the scripts and the dialogue are like very simple, and the way that the movie is is brought about and produced is extremely simple. It's like straight dialogue, and there's like a lot of rock and roll and MTV. And oh, as I was saying earlier about Don Simpson and MTV, he was the first to realize the importance of MTV because he realized it would be free advertising for the movies. Because if you get a big, uh, you get like, I don't know, Glenn Fry, some boomer or whatever, who's still made popular '80s songs, and you put them in the song in the movie, then they'll make a music video, and the music video will play on rotation, and it appeals to the very same target audience that the movie does, and so it's like constant free advertising. Also, he did this because he was trying to promote the idea of like a strong, powerful America where the message is always one of positivity. It's strength. It's a kind of a strength through joy. Ooh, that's a dangerous phrase. But what they said was that their movies, they explained, and actually Bruckheimer kind of explained this. Bruckheimer said that their movies they're always bookended in the same basic way. There's some variation, but in the same basic way. They always begin at dawn because it represents the era. It's like the new dawn of possibilities, right? You wake up to a new day. Tomorrow is another day. You wake up and anything is possible. And the character goes through a kind of a brief character arc. They go through a struggle. They never, by the way, they never have parents. And it's just like Disney movies. They never have parents, and they are always. Are we back? Are we good, you guys? Hopefully, we're good. Um, and uh, and and they never have parents. And Jennifer Beals, and notice that Tom Coombe in Days of Thunder and in Top Gun, both films, he does not have parents. In Top Gun, he has a father who has died. Remember, his dad he's like trying to live up to the image of his dad, who was like this great, Top Gun himself, this great Navy pilot. And Robert Duvall plays his sort of surrogate dad in Days of Thunder. It always, Nick Cage's surrogate dad sort of becomes Sean Connery, and then he himself becomes a dad at the end of the film, right? Sean Connery is also a dad who his restoration is that he makes good with his daughter because he's been in prison because he's SAS and he escaped from, he's been in prison. He's the only guy to escape from Alcatraz, but like he's SAS and they've kept him in this prison. And then when he escapes briefly after the haircut, he goes and he meets his daughter, right? And so they're like, oh, okay, well, you destroyed the entire city in this car race, but and you stole a car and all this stuff, but we got to get these tourists who are actually disgruntled American, what are they, Green Beret, Phoenix program Ed Harris characters who are going to destroy America in the pre-Big Nine event because there is no enemy out there, right? Versus the '80s when there is like the common enemy of the Soviet Union, and that's in Top Gun, right? They're fighting these like MiGs, and the movies always end. The movies always end with a freeze frame, okay? And there are variations, but they generally always end with a freeze frame because they said the freeze frame represents the fact that your good memories and your possibilities of life are frozen in time. That the good memory will live on in your mind after you leave the theater, right? That the good thing that you've witnessed and the way that life should be in the Simpson Bruckheimer movies, this fantastical version of life with these larger than life characters and events and settings will be frozen in your mind when you leave. I think that's pretty brilliant of them to do that. Of course, now the Michael Bay Bruckheimer movies usually begin with the trope of the dawn of dawn rising, the sun rising through the transparent American flag. If you've noticed that, so that like the American flag represents the sun, it represents light. Illuminate, confirm. Uh, what else does he say? He says, oh, here's the auteur theory, and the formula for the movies. Oh yeah, this is pages 44 and 45. Let's see. He says, This is Joe Esterhaz on FlashDance, and Don Simpson. He says the producer-friendly Paramount, because that's where they went. Paramount was the perfect home for them too. They were take-charge guys who refused to cede power to directors or stars. We're not only hands-on but feet-on, Simpson said. We don't take a passive role in any shape or form. Some directors who shall remain nameless do regard movies as an extension of their internal emotional landscape, but Jerry and I decide on the movie we want to make. We then hire an all-star team who can implement the vision. I don't believe in the auteur theory. The movie is the auteur. It tells us what it needs to be. We're here to serve the movie as mistress. No one person, director or writer, is above the call of the final result. Now, do you get why this guy is like the ideas man, the big picture guy, and the absolute biggest bullshit artist of all time in Hollywood? Because he's got such a he has an incredible encyclopedic understanding of the way movies are made, but also of the way that people perceive movies and the way that culture will be influenced by the movies that he creates. He's also totally full of shit. So he says everything and nothing at the same time. A lot of when you watch his interviews, they bullshit in a way. They invented, by the way, Simpson and Bruckheimer invented this. At least this book says so. The like single word pitch, right? Or the phrase pitch for making a movie. In the 70s, this is also a reaction to the 70s and the film industry in the 70s, right? In the 70s, you have the, what became popular was as a result of the 60s, right? And we have the hard-boiled, sometimes, ethnic characters like Al Pacino in Godfather and Godfather 2, and the not like 60s cookie cutter version of America. They explore the darker side of America, and they explore like, crime and like it's more like humanistic and gritty. And that's what the 70s were known for. And that's as a result mainly of Robert Evans. Robert Evans, the producer, really pushed that. He's the guy who produced Polanski's Chinatown, etc. But that sort of went out of fashion with the big money and the big business of the 80s. And Simpson and Bruckheimer, again, they weren't weather vanes. They weren't like seeing which way the wind blew and going with it. They were the wind. That sounds like a Don Simpson, something Don Simpson would say. But that quote is, I forget who was it that said that. I think maybe Harold Bloom said that about T.S. Eliot and Edward Arlington Robinson. Edward Arlington Robinson was a Pulitzer Prize winning major American poet who was huge in the early modern era of America. And of course, T.S. Eliot was at the start of course, T.S. Eliot was absolute establishment, Lloyd's Bank and all that. But in terms of their literature and their poetry, and at the start of Eliot's career, it became obvious that Robinson sort of mimicked the popular trends, especially in the literary world, and that T.S. Eliot was the one sort of creating them. And that is exactly what Don Simpson and Bruckheimer did. It says, as would be, page 44 in this book, as would be most Simpson Bruckheimer projects. Notice, by the way, I didn't actually mark in the book. I only wrote JD, Jeff, trademark, sticky notes because it's a first edition, so I don't want to write in it because I wanted to keep the integrity of the book for this one. But it says, I don't do that for all first editions, just this one and a few others. Anyway, it says, let's see. Flashdance was Flashdance was achingly simple-minded. A high-concept fairy tale cued to modern sensibilities. Jennifer Beals played Alex, an 18-year-old Pittsburgh welder. A girl's got to pay the bills, she explained, who dreams of becoming a ballet dancer and who, in the absence of achieving her dream by night, performs erotic routines at a blue-collar working man's bar called Mobby's. Oh, the pitch, the single word or phrase pitch, by the way, is like, imagine somebody going into a production, into an executive meeting and saying, we want to make a movie, all right? It's Top Gun with cars. That's it. That's all they needed. They were like, fucking do it. Write it. Do it right now. She explains, let's see. who dreams of becoming a ballet dancer by night and performs erotic routines at a blue-collar working man's bar called Malby's. As will be the case with most of the future Simpson Bruckheimer heroes, Alex appears to have no parents, relying instead on an older mentor. In Days of Thunder, the veteran car designer named Harry, in Flashdance, an elderly danseuse named Hannah for support and guidance. Alex falls in love with an unlikely target, the man who runs the company for whom she welds, and achieves her against all odds ambition, in this case, acceptance to a Tony Dance Academy. As in many Simpson Bruckheimer movies, the story begins with a sunrise, signifying the new day, the fresh start in the impending opportunity, and ends with a freeze frame, signifying permanence and perfection of the story's denouement. Simpson had this very strong conviction that to have a hit movie, the central character, before triumphing, he had to triumph, must first be reduced psychologically and almost destroyed before the comeback, said screenwriter Joe Esterhazy, who wrote the final version of Flashdance. He called it the pits. You got to live down in the pits, he'd always say. Through it all, sometimes pumping up the action, sometimes saving the logical story from becoming too apparently preposterous, is a thundering musical score. All their movies were rock and roll, MTV movies, and that was Don's doing. It's rock and roll in a steel mill, or rock and roll in a jet airplane, or rock and roll in a race car. That was a very commercial instinct, as Simpson and Bruckheimer would do with their next film, Beverly Hills Cop, which made a hit song of Glenn Frey's "The Heat Is On," and as Simpson had done with his previous "An Officer and a Gentleman." Oh, I forgot he did "Officer and a Gentleman" with Richard Gere. Was that Richard Gere? No, that was American Gigolo. He did American Gigolo, and then Officer and a Gentleman, and then Flashdance was She's a Maniac. Remember that An Officer and a Gentleman won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for Louis Gossett Jr., and did you know Beverly Hills Cop was nominated for Best Screenplay? It was actually Oscar nominated for Best Screenplay. Didn't know that. Simpson may have been Crimson Tide, which I may get to that in a second, but Crimson Tide was the same thing. They said about Crimson Tide later, they were like, okay, imagine this. We had jets and we had, aircraft carriers, but now we've got a submarine, okay? Because the Cold War, the Cold War is over, but, it's sort of underground or underwater, just like a submarine, right? I mean, the word means that. So we have this, what we're going to do is we're going to take Top Gun and all of the locker room scenes, right? The locker room scenes where Maverick is on the fucking edge, man, and where Maverick, Maverick plays by the book, man. He doesn't like that Maverick is dangerous. And Maverick says, I'm dangerous. That's right. And we're going to have those scenes of, the sweaty kind of a, mano-y-mano tension. It's kind of like America and the Soviet Union, but we're going to put it in a submarine so it's insular, so they can't escape. And we're going to have two titans. We're going to have Denzel, and we're going to have, who are we going to have? Can we get Tom Coombs? No, we're going to have Gene Hackman. We're going to have Gene Hackman because he's like the older character, and he's going to be like the father figure to Denzel, but he's going to be like, he's also kind of be the enemy. So it represents like the duality of man inside the submarine, right? And then at the end, it's going to be a happy ending, man, because nuclear war is averted. Right, that's like literally what they said and did, and that's how the movie was made. He says, let's see, the book says, there's a weird scene where Simpson, of course, was as fitting of his lifestyle, and because he was from the Pacific Northwest, and his dad was like a bear hunter, and he claimed his dad was a bush pilot and all this stuff, but I don't think he was. But he certainly, Simpson, and I actually believe this about his story. He makes up, this kind of weird, like Hollywoodized version of his rags to riches story. He really came from a middle class family. Moved out of Seattle. He was born in Seattle, and then in 1943, same year as Jim Morrison, and then moved to Alaska. And Alaska, it's interesting, was not yet a state, but he moved to Anchorage in and he would hang out in a pretty bad neighborhood, and he probably, went through his own, I don't know what we call this, but he was probably with a woman for the first time at a house of ill repute, we'll say, and that certainly sets the scene for Don Simpson because he was he did abuse women horribly, and he was into S&M and all this kind of creepy shit, and I would say that he was there are glimpses in the book where he was into much worse, because it mentions other people and executives that were into much worse. In fact, Don Simpson, when he was fired for his drug addiction from one of the studios, he made a comment. He said, "Imagine them firing me for a morals clause." He said, "I'm a drug, for drugs. These people are," and he uses words that are essentially, he says, "they are creepers, and they're firing me for a morals clause." He says, but he also he says that when he was young, like he and his dad, like they lived on moose. All they did was eat moose. There weren't grocery stores or any of that. He ate moose. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Right. Kind of like Tony Montana in Scarface. Remember octopus? I got octopus coming out of my fucking ears. And it's also the story of a guy who comes from the American wilderness, the American West, and then makes it big in the exact opposite, right? The glittering, star-studded glamour of Hollywood. The guy who has it all. Again, it's kind of like, it's in a way, it's a lot like, it's the same sort of theme as The Catcher in the Rye that we just covered, because he has everything and nothing, right? He has everything, but he has no faith. He has a grounding in faith. He has a religious background, and he's always searching for meaning. That's why his movies are the way that they are. That's why he wanted to make movies of a kind of a perfect world, but it's all surface, right? It's all celluloid. It's flat on a screen. One of the things, interesting metaphors in the book, is that the movies of Simpson and Bruckheimer are also just like the popcorn that you eat in the theater, right? It's not nutritious. It's like mostly, oxygenated. It's like air and fluff. And it provides you no sustenance. There's hardly any taste, right? But it's something that you enjoy. And it's just like his movies. And I mean, they're fun. They're fun movies. They're great movies. I mean, these guys knew how to make a movie, right? You can't. One thing about these Hollywood people is that they do all this stuff, but they certainly know how to make a movie. Now, that doesn't excuse anything, and that's not saying anything about their substance, but I'm just saying that they know how to make movies, right? In terms of entertainment value, and of course, in terms of culture creation, if you have no analytical eye or you have no worldview, right? On pages 74 and 75, he talks about the club. And he says, let's see. He says, let's see. Yeah, he says on page 75, Simpson was having increasing trouble staying afloat for the press as well. Through the end of Top Gun production, he continued to court the media, buoyed by the Newsweek and interview pieces, and over the saner Bruckheimer's objections. Simpson agreed to be profiled by Esquire's Lynn Hirschberg, a crafty, low-key reporter with a keen eye for the telling detail. In Simpson, she found many, mostly from Simpson's own boasting about his membership in what he called the club, the small group of hyper-powerful men who were running Hollywood. This is the top of the pyramid, not the top of the pyramid where Satan resides, but this is right underneath him in terms of this branch of the pyramid, right? The Hollywood culture creation, movie, entertainment industry. And the club says, he says, people want me, Simpson told Hirschberg. They may hate me, but they want me. That says everything, doesn't it? They may hate me, but they want me. That's being a member of the club. And without that, you might as well be dead. Simpson identified the members. Here we go. First, there's Jeff Katzenberg. He used to be my assistant. Now he's head of production at Disney. Next, Craig Baumgarten. He used to be an executive VP at Columbia until they found out he starred in a prawn film. Now he's a president at Lorimar. Jeff Berg, who calls me the werewolf, and Jim Wyatt, who I call Jumbo. They're both agents at ICM. David Geffen, one of the smartest men anywhere. Larry Gordon, who used to be at Paramount. He thinks he invented me. He's head of production at Fox. Michael Mann, that was surprising. Michael Mann was a member of this club, one of his friends. Michael Mann, director of Heat, right? Who wants me to direct an episode of Miami Vice, which he produces. Steve Tisch, another old friend who co-produced Risky Business, and more and more and more and more. These are all the guys who are head of the. These guys are interchangeable. It's kind of like the heads of San Manto and the uh, ADF backwards, right? Approving certain things, and certain things sponsored by, right? You know what I'm saying? All interchangeable, all on the various boards. It's just like the MIC, right? With the heads of the Defense Department also being members of the various branches of the MIC. These guys are heads of talent agencies, studios, etc., and they all go from one position to another. They're completely psychopathic. At one point, one of the guys that Fleming interviews says that he says essentially to be this kind of character, to be this kind of person successful like this. And I forget who he interviewed, but the guy was the head of one of the studios. He says um, he didn't speak to his roommate for 5 years. He lived in a house with him, but from morning to night, every single thing that he did was focused on the movies. If he ate lunch, it was over a business meeting. If he ate dinner, it was a business meeting. If he ate a late night dinner, it was a business meeting. If he went to a party, it was for contacts. If he went to I'm sure an Eyes Wide Shut Creeper event, it was for the same thing, for compromise. They're completely psychopathic. They have no family. No, they have family, but it always breaks apart, and their families are, I don't know. But he says, on page 79, we get into, in 1985, Simpson was introduced to Elizabeth Adams. Alex Adams was a short, pudgy, plug-ugly woman who, widowed and broke, tireless in her pursuit of money, had abandoned the flower business that had been her trade and entered the netherworld of high-class prostitution. From 1971 to 1992, she had become Hollywood's leading procurer. It is not clear who introduced her to Simpson, but in many respects, he did not need an introduction. He was young, powerful, energetic, and amusing, and he fulfilled both of Alex's requirements for client status. He had money and a prodigious appetite for hookers. Now, it goes on to say she was an unlikely candidate for the job. This is my criticism, one of my criticisms of the book. She was an unlikely candidate for the position because she grew up with a German-American father and Spanish-Philippine mother. The family had moved to San Francisco at the advent of World War II, and these people aren't unlikely. They're either groomed for their roles, or they are the children of powerful people, and this is generational, right? And it talks about how now that doesn't mean always. There can be people that come out of nowhere to start a new degenerate industry, right? Oh yeah, we got Cash Apps. We got Cash Apps in this country. We got Cash Appski. We got Venmo, and we got PayPal. Please support me. Think about supporting me out there. Just click on the links. The links work. I know they work. I don't know about other countries, but they certainly work. And you can donate and you can support me. And I really appreciate your support out there. Thank you guys for supporting me. And I will get to the super chats in a few minutes. But what he also doesn't go into here is how this industry that I'm discussing now is obviously one that we know is more of a Jeff Stein industry, Jeff Stein Effrey industry. This is a lot darker. It's hard for me to determine what I can discuss in the moment. But we'll just say that he was a prodigious client of that industry. And not only was he, but the book talks about how just about everyone you can imagine was on these clientele lists. Now, this came out in the Heidi Fleiss trial and in some of the books that these people wrote. But what's interesting is it confirms what we all know here, is that these people were informants. They were police informants, federal informants. They had protection rackets, and they had protection at the highest levels. They had to in order to run their industry, right? In fact, one of these people who was, I think it was, maybe it was Heidi Fleiss, was trying, she got a knock on the door from the head of the Vice Squad at the LAPD, who essentially said, hey, I need you to give me information just like your predecessor did. And she said, fuck you. Excuse my language, folks. I know it's early. But she said that. And the guy said, okay, well, now we got a case on you. And then that's was the start of her destruction. Um, Now that's kind of a surface level, right? We're talking about blackmail operations and Jeff Stein Effrey stuff that goes far beyond that. But the book doesn't touch on that, of course. Um, and It talks about how Jack Nicholson, Sean Penn, and a bunch of these people went ballistic and would do physical violence to the members of this particular industry I'm describing, especially Don Simpson. He was uh, a brutal piece of shit. Let's see. That's on page 92 and 93 of the book. Now, page 120 and 121 is interesting. There's something revelatory here because it deals with OJ. Of course, Joe Esterhaz in his book talks about how how incestuous Hollywood is, literally and figuratively. And he talks about how, um, for instance, like Robert Shapiro and Nicole Brown Simpson and Cato Kalin and Ron Goldman, all these people like all had connections with other people. And one of Don Simpson's connections is he was freaked out on the day where he heard the news of OJ, not for the reasons that any human being would be freaked out by, which is, sympathy and shock and horror at what had happened with people that he knew. He was freaked out because he shared the same dealer as OJ. And what he says in the book is that he witnessed OJ 2 hours before the murders took place, buying crystal meth from his dealer. And he's worried that his name is going to come up in connection with this because his dealer sold crystal meth to Cato Kalin. He walked away, he came back, and OJ was like wiping his face and his nose. And that's interesting because that also comes up in this book, American Desperado, that I have somewhere up here, which deals with, where is it? American Desperado. I can't find it right now, but it's a great book that's another great book. And it's a book by Evan Roberts. And it's a book on this guy, not Ricky Prado. It deals with Ricky Prado. You may know Ricky Prado. He's one of the famous mafia turned CIA sort of MK Delta assassins. He dealt with the heroin trade, cocaine trade. He was he was a hitman. He dealt with Pablo, and but the book deals with the guy who was the main guy responsible for being the liaison for getting the cocaine from Colombia to America, and he had ties with intelligence and with the mafia. But in the book, he talks about if the glove don't fit, right? He talks about OJ and how OJ, when he had a house in Miami, OJ would go down there with James Caan. He was friends with Jimmy Caan. James Caan always, if you notice how Jimmy Caan like never turns his neck, he always turns, hey, I'm Jimmy Caan, right? He doesn't even do that. What'd you say? What'd you say? Right? He can't turn his neck. And he would go down there. They would have all night parties, and how OJ, he says OJ was basically a schizoid and a cocaine freak. And then this talks about him doing crystal meth 2 hours beforehand. Let's see, Simpson and oh yeah, this is about Simpson and Paul Schrader. Again, Paul Schrader, one of the great Hollywood writers. It says it was a very glamorous, hip world. This is page 121. Very glamorous, hip world, according to Schrader, and those were very cokey times. He and Simpson, who both came from strict religious backgrounds, were the kind of people who would get very stoned and sit around talking about God. After several hours, Don and I would be the only people left in the room, Schrader said. One night, Schrader and Simpson left the party because Simpson wanted to show off his new Porsche. They sat in the front seat, snorting lines of yayo. All of a sudden, Schrader said it was 5 hours later. We went back inside and no one was there. For 5 hours, we talked serious, deep stuff about aesthetics and morality and ideas about God. And to this day, I have no memory of what we actually talked about. It was one of those college dorm sorts of conversations, which, even if they are sort of jejune, are not that easy to find in Los Angeles. Producer Linda Obst, a friend to both men, said that was the best Los Angeles had to offer. Simpson and Schrader holding court. That's the best they have to offer because that's the only instance of anybody searching for any meaning in Hollywood. Pages 130 and 131 talk about Khashoggi, right? Remember Khashoggi, who Jay has covered. And did you know on page, let's see, page 181, talks about Quentin Tarantino. He could see Quentin Tarantino, who'd helped write his Crimson Tide across the room. Did you know that? That Quentin Tarantino helped to rewrite the script for Crimson Tide? He did rewrites on it. That's why the dialogue in the film is like snappy. Pages 182, 183, he talks about how early in the 80s, this was 1980? John Belushi speedball OD'd at the Chateau Marmont, and Don Simpson knew him and was worried that he would be next. Of course, he lasted for much longer. But essentially, he lived kind of the same sort of lifestyle in a way. Do you know who was with? I'm sure you guys all know this, but you know who was with John Belushi when he died that night? Did you know this? When he OD'd at the Chateau Marmont, he was partying with Bobby De Niro and Robin Williams. Did you know that? I'm sure you knew that. Everybody kind of knows that, I guess. Pages 192, 193 are interesting because this deals with Hollywood and what Hollywood is. Let's see. Brian, shouts out to Brian, says Lip is Honor Stallion dialogue had to be QT. Exactly. I've seen the Lip is Honor horses. I saw them in Portugal. I've been to Vienna and to Portugal, and I saw Lip is Honor horses training in Portugal, in Lisbon, which is weird, of all places, right? But yes, that is one of the major elements of dialogue in the film, right? Gene Hackman and Denzel's discussion about Lip is Honors, and that is definitely Tarantino, right? Sit your butt down. I'm going to shut your butt down. I'm going to shut your butt down. JD does the best impression of Quentin Tarantino. It says, Don Simpson said, the pursuit of making money is the only reason to make movies. The document announced in its opening salvo. Don Simpson would would get an assistant in there and he'd say, write down every fucking word I say, right? And you can imagine him shouting at his assistants and blowing huge lines of cocaine, probably shooting up in the bathroom, swallowing, gobbling pills. And he would just talk for like 7 or 8 hours at a time, dictating memos. Interestingly, the memos are quite fruitful. The memos like have a lot of revelatory information about Hollywood. And one of the things was, he said, we have no obligation to make history. We have no obligation to make art. We have no obligation to make a statement. Our obligation is to make money. And to make money, it may be necessary to make history. This is so Don Simpson. To make money, it may be important to make art or some significant statement. To make money, it may be important to win the Academy Award, for it might mean another $10 million at the box office. Our only objective is to make money. But in order to make money, we must always make entertaining movies. Right? Encapsulating the basics of the high concept theory developed at Paramount and demonstrating the degree to which Simpson's cynicism about the picture business had overtaken him, the document continued, a powerful idea is the heart of any successful movie. The creative premise is what first attracts people to the product. A good idea is one that seems imaginative, original, and in some way new and unique. The power of the biggest blockbuster movies is that they come from out of nowhere and break new ground. In many cases, a compelling idea may not be strictly original, but it will seem different and exciting for its time. The most distinctive quality of a strong concept is that it does not seem familiar. The appropriate star or cast is important too, the document argued, as are the contributions of the film's writer and director, but all concerns are secondary to concept, the high concept. Pages 202 and 203 talk about him starting to get prescriptions of morphine. He started taking injections of morphine. Page 206, he says, there's a great quote. It says, it's a perfect set of Simpson Bruckheimer moments. Don's the brilliant cavalier madman. Jerry's the sobering influence. Together, they're complementary, interchangeable, indomitable. As Beverly Hills Cop director Marty Brest once said of the pair, Don and Jerry are atomic producers. They're like plutonium. Their energy can either drive a city or destroy it, as one longtime Simpson Bruckheimer observer said at the time. It's not good cop, bad cop. It's bad cop, worse cop. Right? Oh, page 212. This was interesting. So they got this guy whose name is Pelicano, I think. His name's Pelicano. This guy was a mafia connected a private detective who came to Hollywood to solve, he was basically a fixer in a case that was going to expose someone. And he ended up staying in Hollywood because he was so good. He was so, dirty at what he did. He was so good. And he basically was contracted to work for Simpson. So, for instance, Don Simpson would be like, he'd be like, listen, he'd be playing around with his Uzi. And he had an Uzi with a laser sight, and he would like point it at Pelicano, and he would be like, "What do you think? Does this scare you?" And at one point, he pointed a 9mm at him, and he said, "Are you scared?" And Pelicano said, "No, because I know that's a replica." And so he only respected people that were as like fucking crazy and psycho as he was, right? Excuse my language. Thanks, Jeff. Yes, JD and Tristana, beautiful Tristana tonight. We got a big night tonight. We've got Jay and our friends Jay and Tristan at Primal Edge Health tonight over at Jay's Analysis, over at JD's, Jay Dyer's YouTube channel. So we're all going to be there for that, of course, in just a few minutes. Let's see. This says, but they dealt with, so what he said with the reporters was, we got to deal with these reporters. They keep writing they keep writing the shit about us, and it was really pissing Don Simpson off. So what he did was he said he hired Pelicano, and he was like, listen, I want you to go and, take care of. It's like that Quentin Tarantino scene in Pulp Fiction. The boss asked me to take care of her. Take care of her? No, man. Take her out to dinner and shit, right? But he wanted them taken care of. And on page 212, this says, the cop who was investigating the overdose at Simpson's pool house said he discovered that Frederick had several celebrity clients. Frederick was this Dr. Feelgood. I think he was the actual Dr. Feelgood in the Motley Crue song, because they were all clients of this guy. Actually, Dr. Feelgood, that might be the West Coast Dr. Feelgood. The original Dr. Feelgood was in New York. You remember he was the guy. He's discussed in Jim Carroll's, what's it called? Forced Entries book that I talked about in the J.D. Salinger stream, the sequel to the Basketball Diaries. And Jim Carroll was working as an assistant for an artist friend of his who was a client of Dr. Feelgood. And two famous clients of Dr. Feelgood at the time were John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev. They were both clients of this guy, and they were both receiving amphetamine injections. And that's why when Kennedy and Khrushchev met at that one summit, and they walked away in fury from one another, it was because Dr. Feelgood was out of town and they couldn't receive their amphetamine injections. Isn't that weird? This says he discovered that Frederick had several celebrity clients. One of them was Eileen. Is that her name? Eileen Getty. She's a Getty, the granddaughter of oil baron J. Paul Getty. I've got a book about Getty here, House of Getty. Is it House of Getty? About J. Paul Getty and John Paul Getty II and John Paul Getty III. And John Paul Getty the second. The third is the one who got his ear cut off by the group by the Turkish, probably Red Brigade Gladio group in Italy. And then the second was the guy who went on to get English citizens. He died not a few years ago. It's probably been 20 years now, but he died a few years ago. And he was, I just remember John Paul Getty II because he owned one of the only copies of Shakespeare's First Folio, and he bought a football club in England. Anyway, it says, the granddaughter of oil baron J. Paul Getty. Records show that on one single night, August 15th, 1995, the very day that Ammerman overdosed in Simpson's pool house, Frederick wrote for Getty prescriptions for 120 morphine tablets, 200 Percodan tablets, 200 Dexedrine capsules, 90 doses of clonidine, 90 of Xanax, 60 of Klonopin, and 60 of Valium. 8 days later, Frederick wrote Simpson a prescription for morphine. This was a good business for Frederick. Miller says, estimating that Getty's drug bill for 1 month ran as high as $100,000. He also talks about how Getty, yeah, let's see. Or no, I just discussed that. At one point, when he's trying to get clean, he is introduced to Scientology, of course, through Tom Coombe, and he actually goes to get audited at the Scientology place, and he ended up kicking David Miscavige off the set of Days of Thunder. But he went there to get audited, and at first he was taken in by this, and then he spent like a day at a retreat, and then he walked away saying they're full of shit. But it's interesting because it talks about how they made him an OT, an operating thetan, right? Remember how Chaz Manson was theta clear? He was like the highest rank in Scientology. I always think it's interesting because, you know, Jay's gone into this a lot about how L. Ron Hubbard, you know, as a disciple of Aleister Crowley, and I think it's interesting that OT and OT zero and operating thetan coincides with OTO, right? Ordo Templi Orientis. Page 235 talks about his injections of growth hormones and how Sylvester Stallone was one of the they got Sylvester Stallone off of doing a movie because Stallone wanted to do it and rewrote the script. I forget which movie it is, but he wanted to rewrite the entire script, and they were like, no, this is no good. How can we get Stallone off of this movie? So they took Stallone, and they were like, hey, man, there's an experimental new treatment for, like, you know, eternal youth in Switzerland. And they sent him off there. Stallone took his private jet. Stallone was, I think, the first Hollywood actor who demanded a Gulfstream as part of his payments. That was for Rambo 3. And that started the trend of everybody buying a jet. Of course, remember in our Led Zeppelin stream, Led Zeppelin owned a 747, right? They owned the Starship and then later Caesar's Chariot. The Rolling Stones owned a 747. But in terms of Hollywood movie industry, Stallone started that. And that's how they got him off the set. Pages 244 and 245 talk about Colonel David H. Hackworth. And it says, Simpson had just read the memoirs of Colonel David H. Hackworth, a much decorated Vietnam field commander, who in April 1995 published an assault on American military mismanagement of its long Southeast Asian campaigns. Sounds like Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, right? He broke from them, and then he broke from himself. I'd never seen a man so broken up and ripped apart. Right? Seems they didn't dig what he had to tell them. Simpson had seen a recent 60 Minutes investigation of Marines who had done covert, unlawful Southeast Asian operations for the Pentagon, which promptly abandoned the Marines' families if the soldiers were killed. Right? Of course, these are Marines, but this is like Phoenix Program, LRP, you know, the Army LRP stuff, incursions into Southeast Asia. That's what Apocalypse Now is. Simpson combined elements of both and gave Ed Harris' character an honorable mission and a sympathetic reason to take over Alcatraz and hold the city of San Francisco hostage. He was going to stand his ground until the Pentagon made itself accountable to the men who had died serving their country. Simpson's contribution was in creating a really compelling villain, a soldier with a noble end, but unfortunately psychotic means. Brilliant. It is brilliant that he makes the villain a pure villain who is so sympathetic in a way, right? Let's see. When he died, this is interesting because we get to page 252 and 253 and his death. When he died, the investigating cop, who was the one who had gone there and investigated, he was the same one who investigated the death of Simpson's psychiatrist who overdosed on Demerol, morphine, and cocaine. He says the scene had been sanitized before he gets there. He gets there and he's the investigating officer, and already the death scene had been sanitized. Then there's no more mention of it in this. Now, who knows? I'm sure Don Simpson did OD, but would it be unlikely that he would be taken care of, right, by the other members of this club, by other members of the elite circles, for his exploits, his big mouth, his something dealing with compromised creeper material? Who knows? Certainly, he was aware of all the clientele of Heidi Fleiss and Alex Adams, and maybe he was. I mean, that's all speculation, but he does say that the scene had been sanitized. On pages 272 and 273, he talks about how Hollywood is incestuous, and that is a direct quote from Hollywood Animal. There's too much to go into both books for this stream, but Hollywood Animal essentially has. I mean, we could talk about Joe Esterhazy a little bit. Joe Esterhazy was a Hungarian-born. Was he also born in 43? I think he was born in 43 as well. And he was a Hungarian whose family fled Hungary in the wake of the oncoming Soviet invasion of Hungary and made it to America. He is the guy who he's the first person in Hollywood to sell a screenplay for $3 million, $3.7 million, and then $4.3 million. And it's interesting because his screenplays became movies that were like flops, right? Like Jade. He did Jade. He did not Jet. Was it Jagged Edge or Jet or what's the one with Jeff Bridges that he did? And then he did Jade. He did Sliver. Remember Sliver with Sharon Stone, which was supposed to be the big, sort of star vehicle post Basic Instinct. Basic Instinct was obviously huge. That was a huge success. But there were always bidding wars for Joe Esterhazy's scripts, sight unseen. See, he had this ability to write a script, to write a screenplay, or to not even to pitch an idea or to get a pitch from Don Simpson, and then push it and then sell it sight unseen, and there would be a bidding war. And then a lot of his movies were shelved. They ended up in development hell, or they were just shelved. And he eventually, now he lives in Ohio. But he became a screenwriter because he was a novelist. He won a National Book Award in I think 1978. And then they said, "Hey, you want to come into Hollywood and write a movie?" And I think his first Hollywood movie was the movie Fist, which is probably nobody's seen it. It's Sylvester Stallone. And let's see, that's post Rocky, but it was a Sylvester Stallone vehicle, which then sort of catapulted him into 80s and 90s. He wrote Flashdance, of course, for Don Simpson. He was a friend of Don Simpson's. But he is highly critical of Hollywood. He was also a friend and client of Heidi Fleiss, and he writes about it in the book. And he says on page 552, he says, "This is how incestuous Hollywood is. The head of the publishing company which published the Hooker's book was Evans's next door neighbor. They all live in Beverly Hills together." And what else does he say? He says, his family, let's see, he talks about, he was a Hungarian, right? And he was, and his family was fleeing from the Soviets, but they were taken to Mauthausen concentration camp. He talks about how he's so arrogant also. He says on page 13, he says, they wanted to make this movie that he had written, the Alan Smithy story, which is the Alan Smithy story, which became a movie. Nobody's seen it, but it's a movie that is a expose satire of Robert Evans and Robert Evans's shit. Robert Evans is a real scumbag. Robert Evans, if you didn't know this, was also implicated in a murder, which he somehow skated, because he was a powerful Hollywood studio head. But they were going to make his story into a movie, and it was sort of a satire on Hollywood. And Mick Jagger called; he wanted to play the role, and it says the assistant spoke to Mick and called the producer back. Mick didn't want to meet with Joe Esterhazy. Mick said Mick didn't have meetings with screenwriters. Mick had meetings with directors. Yeah, but Joe Esterhazy is the screenwriter. He became the superstar Hollywood screenwriter. Besides, the assistant said Mick had some script ideas. Oh boy, here we go. You can just imagine Don Simpson and Joe Esterhazy saying, "Oh yeah, this fucking rock star has ideas for a script." Okay, sure. Well, that also, one of Esterhazy's movies was that one. It's one of the movies that Bob Dylan starred in. I can't remember the name of it. I just remember the Korolko logo on it. The producers told me what Mick Jagger's, let's see, not especially, Arthur Hiller said, and tried talking me into letting his friend Michael York play the part. Michael York. Remember Michael York is in Logan's Run, and he played Romeo in the 60s, Franco Zeffirelli, Romeo and Juliet. In my insufferable, no, was he? No, that was Leonard Whiting. He played Romeo. Michael York played Tybalt in that Franco Zeffirelli, and then he went on to be in Logan's Run. And remember, he's in Austin Powers. Austin, right? In my insufferable way, I told the producer to tell Mick's assistant to tell Mick Jumpin' Jack Flash himself to go fuck himself. I was such a big shot screenwriter that in a little Mississippi town near Memphis, I accomplished something Tom Coombe and Danny DeVito couldn't do. I called my boyhood idol, Jerry Lee Lewis, introduced myself, told him I was in town, and he said, sure, come on over. I heard later that Cruise and DeVito had made similar calls, but Jerry Lee didn't like Cruise's work, and he thought DeVito was a pygmy, so he wouldn't see him. Jerry Lee Lewis is still alive, by the way. I think he still lives in North Mississippi. John Grisham, of course, wrote, they were in town because of The Firm. They were filming The Firm in Memphis, right? Peabody Hotel. And John Grisham lived right there on the road to Oxford, Mississippi. Anybody can see his house, but now I think he lives in Charlottesville. He lives here. His kids went to one of my rival schools. Played lax against them, bro. And we dominated, of course, we dominated. When I got to his ranch, Jerry Lee came out from behind the steel door of the bedroom he spent most of his time in, wearing a white terry cloth robe and panda slippers. He had an unlighted Dunhill pipe in his mouth. We looked like two aging geezers. We'd seen too many miles of bumpy, potholed roads. Two aging geezers who'd used too many unhealthy substances to cushion the bumps. Basic Instinct. That's one of my favorite movies, Jerry Lee Lewis said. Then he said, you know that shot where she sticks her whatchamacallit into the camera? Did they have to shoot that for a long time? Jerry Lee Lewis obviously is also a pervert and a creeper. I read his biography, and I read his damn biography a few years ago, and then I left it on the fucking plane excuse my language. I left it on the plane by accident. And it was such a good book. I'd finished it, but I left it on the plane by accident in the back of the seat. Damn it. Now somebody's got a copy of that Jerry Lee Lewis biography somewhere. And he's old. He's old as hell. And Jerry Lee Lewis was Jerry Lee Lewis was a speed addict at the time in the 50s when, of course, Johnny Cash and Elvis were. And then most people don't know he became I think he was a heroin addict, but he became a methadone addict. But he still lives out there in North Mississippi. But anyway, yeah, and I only in a cursory way discussed Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon. That would be a whole other stream. But Hollywood Babylon's interesting because it's one of the first, it's not a journalistic expose. It's kind of it's a book about Hollywood and the darker side of early sort of golden age Hollywood, especially about people like Rudolph Valentino. If you didn't know, Rudolph Valentino was fake and gray, and was known for, well, I can't say what he was known for having in his house, but it was something bad. He also talks about a bunch of the early stars who were also heroin addicts and their antics. You can kind of see that in a few movies. You can see it in Strange Angel. You can see it in, you can see bits of it. It's kind of about that. That's what Josh Brolin's character does. He deals with people like that in Hail Caesar, the Coen Brothers movie. Shouts out to Jeff for our Coen Brothers sponsored stream that we did on No Country for Old Men. If you want to sponsor a stream, you guys, if you want to sponsor a stream, hit me up with some fat Kong bucks, some Dugan coin, and give me some ideas, and I will do it. Shouts out to Jack for that stream on Mark Twain that we did, The Prince and the Pauper. Shouts out to Countess for that sponsored stream we did on J.D. Salinger. So shoot me some ideas and support me. If you want to support me, hit those links. And right now I'm gonna read some super chats because we've gotten some support over the past couple of days. We got some support from Maddie. Let's see, Brian says, Waylon Green's unproduced Crusade script was going to be directed by him, starring Arnold. Would have been amazing. Hold on, let me see the comment thread because I'm reading the end of that. Hold on, let me go to Venmo. And Brian donates $10 via Venmo. Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate you, homeboy. He said, great stream yet again. Maybe we can hear a Verhoeven one soon. That'd be great to talk about Verhoeven and Basic Instinct. Thank you so much for that. Let's see. On PayPal, we have a $5 donation from, let's see, is this Adam Hirsch? Yes, thank you, sir, for that $5 donation. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much. And we also had some support from, let's see. Let's see. Yes, Brian sends $10. Is this? Oh yeah. I thank you to Devin also the other day who donated $10 and said, Don D and Jackal streams were fantastic, brothers. Streams are so well done, and I know that takes time and a lot of thought, planning, etc. So here's some SHEKELS to keep the dream alive. God bless. Thank you. Well, God bless you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for donating those fat Kong bucks, and I really appreciate you so much. Let's see. Andrew Martin donated $25 last a few days ago. I don't know if I got to him last time. Thank you so much for that. And hold on, we got a couple more here. Yes, Maddie donated $12 last time for keeping the 250 IQ content coming. Thank you to Maddie. And also, shouts out to Maddie at Real Cooter Brown. Really appreciate you. Shouts out to Mikhail, who also donated last time. Shouts out to, if I forgot you or if I didn't get to you, forgive me. I can be kind of a beautiful slow boy here sometimes. But I will certainly give you a shout out and thank you for supporting me. Thanks to everybody for supporting me and for coming to the stream on Don Simpson and High Concept. The legacy of Don Simpson is such that, you know, when he died, of course, Bruckheimer and Michael Bay continue. They continue their, you know, propaganda, American vision with films such as 13 Hours. You know, again, starting with the dawn rising through the transparent American flag, and their own Americanized. Whoa, that was the doggy. Their own version of, you know, the American export and MIC power and all that stuff. You know, they were also responsible in a way for the careers of these major, these major people who became major actors, especially in the 80s. I mean, yes, Mel Gibson had done Mad Max and Mad Max 2, right? And the Road Warrior. But Mel Gibson and then Bruce Willis, I mean, the buddy cop movie became a thing, or the comedic action movie became a thing because of Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, right? That's why Beverly Hills Cop works so well. Remember, Beverly Hills Cop is about you've got a Detroit, and this evolved again over a long time, but you've got a guy from a gritty sort of, you know, back east from LA place, who is a, you know, cop who doesn't play by the rules, and his friend is murdered, and it turns out that he is connected to this art dealer in Hollywood. And the art dealer is played by Steven Berkoff, who is great at playing villains, by the way. Remember, what was he in? Was he in Octopussy? He was the sort of henchman in that. He's great at playing, like, you know, villainous Soviet generals. He's got he's the one who's got like the mole right on his forehead and all that. But it deals with money laundering, and because he's money laundering German bearer bonds, replacing art. It's just a front, right? So that's what Hollywood is. I mean, look, you know, they make movies, and one thing about the book is that it discusses the fact. Oh, dog's barking. It discusses the fact that, you know, basically you make one major vehicle in Hollywood. Hold on 1 second. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. I'm back, y'all. You make one major vehicle in Hollywood, and it supports all of the, you know, artistic ventures of the smaller movies that fail. It also yes. Let's see. Jeff brings up Hunter Biden. You know, it's this, and again, this is what Nick Mullen said. You know, it's like Nick Mullen said Hunter Biden, you know, is the black bag man for I don't want to say too much, but he's the go between guy, right? And he is the stand-in, he's the proxy for that part of the power structure. And then he gets, he goes through this humiliation ritual and all this stuff. And then what happens is they're like, Nick Mullen's joke is, we're going to do something, that Bo Jiden says, listen, listen, I love you, but we're going to do something for you. We're going to make you, we're going to degrade you as much as possible. We're going to make you, fake paint, this shit. And then you're going to, launder your Kong bucks through it, right? Because he didn't paint it. And he has to go through this like charade of being this guy, selling these paintings to powerful people for obviously for other purposes. That's what the art. I mean, that's what Gordon Gekko deals with in Wall Street, right? That's what I have a biography over there of Jean-Michel Basquiat, and it talks about a lot of that. And then we have, the movie industry itself doing that. I mean, look, when you look at the box office receipts, especially in the wake of Karanka, right? They are dismal. They're abysmal. And we know what we have. We have the whole superhero, the superhero, replacement, weird Gnostic spirituality thing that's going on. And then that is responsible for, I remember that interview with Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. also plays a part in this book, High Concept. And Robert Downey Jr. Is mentioned as, he had just gotten out of rehab, and then he is freebasing with Don Simpson and their dealer for like 3 days straight. And until his crash and burn, Charles Sheen's crash and burn and all this stuff. And they asked Robert Downey Jr. later, after his sort of organized redemption through Iron Man and all that, as a proxy for Elon Musk, obviously. What do you are you interested in making any smaller art house movies? And he said, no. What am I gonna fucking do that for? I make movies. I'm gonna make Hollywood. I'm gonna make big budget. I'm not interested in doing a movie about like story and art, right? And that is kind of like a Don Simpson-esque attitude about making movies, right? That it's all simply a, yes, the box office is important, and yes, those things they do make actual money, right? But the other side of it is the underside, right? The undercurrent, which is that there's no way that some of these movies cost $300 million. It's bloated. We all know that. It's bloated, just like any mafia operation would be dealing with, getting rights to buildings in New York City, right? And the mafia, I forgot the whole mafia. One more thing before we go. I forgot the mafia connection with Simpson. Again, Fleming glosses over it. He doesn't really go into it that much, but at one point he had threatened a woman. He had threatened to kill a woman, and that woman happened to be connected to the Colombo crime family, who sent representatives to shake down Simpson, and Don Simpson had to pay them. Dog's telling me it's time to go. Had to pay them a bunch of money for a number of years to settle their sort of dispute. Okay, so that's about all we got tonight. Dog's telling me it's time to go. I love y'all. Thank you for being here so much. I appreciate you, and I will see you at JD's house over at Jay's Analysis with Tristan tonight. So I love y'all. Peace. Thank you for being here. Peace.